Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Work Week panel session. Today we'll be discussing building a diverse workforce for the future of work. I'm Katie Birch, the Senior Director of Sales at Indeed in Singapore, and we're excited to have you with us today, brought to you by Indeed in association with People Matters. At Indeed, we are firm believers that building and nurturing a diverse workforce creates a strong foundation for immediate and future business success. We've instituted a number of initiatives to support our diverse workforce and are consistently evolving our strategies with diversity, inclusion, and belonging at the core. An example of these initiatives is our Employee Inclusion Resource Groups, which we refer to as IRGs, for our workforce of 10,000 plus team members in over 15 countries globally. These IRGs support interactions, build a sense of community, and bring company and industry-wide focus and resources for members of various diverse groups within our organisation. The roles of some IRGs have been critical and eye-opening for many of us and include key senior leadership team level sponsors to provide support and further the cause for each specific IRG. Examples of the IRGs within Indeed include Women at Indeed, Access at Indeed, which supports team members with visible and invisible disabilities, Black Inclusion Group, Asian Network, and Parents and Caregivers, to name a few. Indeed also regularly releases data on our workforce constitution, and our TA teams work to ensure that we have a diverse mix of candidates across roles and seniorities in all areas of the organisation. This is, of course, a work in progress, and we remain consistently committed to our goals. Here in APAC, we have employees across our offices in Bangalore, Singapore, Sydney, and Tokyo, and dedicated DI&B teams to ensure that the needs of employees within the region are heard, supported, and considered. With over 250 million visitors globally, we focus on the needs of job seekers a lot. We're continuing to build from our values to ensure that all job seekers and employers have equal access to Indeed's products and services. Now, let's get the session started and uncover why and how leaders should focus on attracting, retaining, and inspiring a diverse workforce. I'll start by introducing our panelists, senior leaders known in the industry across APAC who will be sharing their perspectives around the key theme of diversity, which is so very important for the workforces of the future. So our first panelist is Nalita Azmi, who's the Group Chief People Officer at Axiata. Nalita's been a pioneer in shaping culture, driving transformation, agility, and digital, and impacting on diversity and total well-being. It's a lot to do. Nalita, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. Thanks for giving us your time. We also have with us Joyce Lee, who's the Employer Branding Lead at Government Technology Agency of Singapore. Joyce's career goals are 1, to help organisations and talent be successful, and 2, to achieve personal work-life satisfaction. Areas she feels most passionate about and also well-equipped to contribute meaningfully in the future include diversity, inclusion and belonging, employer branding, employee engagement, talent management, corporate communications, and branding and customer success. Great to have you with us also, Joyce. Look forward to your contributions today.
Thanks for having me.
And I'd also like to welcome Anish Laushandani, who's the Head of Talent Global Processes at Standard Chartered Bank in Singapore. Anish is the Global HR leader with Board of Directors and governance experience and an experienced leadership coach to senior executives. In this leadership role, Anish is responsible for developing, transforming, and executing holistic talent strategies that drive a high-performance culture of innovation, inclusion, and diversity. Welcome, Anish. Thank you also for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, just before we get started, a quick note for our attendees. If you have any questions during the session for our speakers, please feel free to use the chat window. We'll bring them up towards the end of the session during the time that we've reserved for the Q&A, so stay tuned and keep posting your questions so that we can address them to our speakers. So without further ado, let's start the session with our first question to the panel. So I might throw you in the deep end straight up, Anish, and ask you our first question first. With the changing of work in the future, how do you think the overall process of attracting and hiring talent has evolved? How do you see diversity and inclusion contributing here?
Thanks, Kitty. I think a great question. And I think you're so true. Means the way the nature of work is evolving, the way people are actually looking at work is actually changing drastically. And the way we need to hire and develop our people is actually also kind of equally kind of, taking a big shift. So if we start looking at some of the aspects of, future of work, it kind of brings in things around new skills. Yeah. And how are we really being inclusive, as organizations to actually, create that platform for people to build those new skills. Yeah. And if we start looking at it in the lens of hiring and attracting, I think it all talks around the EVP or employee value proposition organizations have. And if this is something individuals are looking for their own development, I think that is in a way for us to elevate our EVP proposition and actually start looking at how are we really creating that environment for people to come and actually learn these new skills. So that's how I kind of see this changing quite drastically, and the way I think organizations need to position this, because individuals are like now quite open to say how we really learn, how we really kind of evolve in that area, and having a clear communication strategy around hiring and actually elevating our EVP is going to be one of the key areas to start focusing far more, which possibly able to attract people who actually are curious, want to learn, and actually take risk and innovate in that space as well. So quite a lot to do in that space, I would say. Yeah, but that's the initial bit of how it's starting to evolve as we kind of look ahead.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Nolita, would you like to share your thoughts as well?
Sure. It's interesting for a digital and a telco company, and how we are actually accessing the market is also very different. It also comes back to the organization, apart from the EVP, is are you prepared to do work form arrangement which might be different? Because can we leverage on the gig workers, for example, where it's much more project based, and therefore the how we go and attract them is also different. So I think the work arrangements within an organization is also evolving, the channels that we go through and the communities that we access, and increasingly the EVP, the value proposition we bring in upfront. I have to say, we have to articulate upfront what is my philosophy, the organization's philosophy on sustainability and diversity. Those questions come up because I think people nowadays is a two-way. We search for talents, and talents search for organizations that reflect purpose. So the articulation of what we are looking for and how, it's, I think, much more compelling. And I know people talk about talent crunch and everything else, but each of the organizations that are represented here today, we want the best. So sometimes I feel that, well, there's going to be a pool that everybody wants, and regardless of what industry, and having been an ex-banker, hey, I want my digital talents too. I want my analytical talents, and it's very much skills-based as well to bring in the iteration. So I think that's where, when you talk about how do we access, the method is different, and also the parameters that we amplify on what we want. That's how I see the landscape changing for us.
Yeah, that's really great. And actually, you've both touched on EVP, which is really interesting, and you touched on something else that's also a big topic, especially in the APAC region at the moment, which is that companies are looking for candidates, but candidates are now also looking, more specifically at the companies, and that's where employer branding becomes such an important part of this strategy, and so perfect opportunity for Joyce to contribute, because I know that employer branding is one of your passions, Joyce. So would you like to jump in here and share your thoughts?
Yeah, totally. So I'm so glad that Anish and Norlita have already sort of like captured the essence of my job, which is really to amplify the EVP, which is really important because the EVP is meant to be a reflection of what your organization is truly about, and sharing that with the talents that you want to be able to attract into your organization. So I think my answer to your question earlier, Katie, is going to take on a slightly different spin, but no less important, I feel. I think when we talk about the future of work, technology plays a very significant role here, but with it comes both benefits as well as challenges to attracting and recruiting or hiring talent for that matter. So one of the major shifts is the virtualization of the recruitment process, which I'm sure everyone in this room has experienced in the recent year or so. It was a massive change for us as a public sector agency, as we are very used to interviewing, hiring, and onboarding our talent. But now we have got to shift or pivot entirely virtually using virtual platforms since April 2020, when circuit breaker in Singapore happened. So for hiring managers who are very used to being able to see and assess their candidates in person, doing it over a video conferencing platform requires them to actually change the way that they interview, they read their candidates as well as assess them as well. I think this also brought to mind a point by a panelist at a very recent D&I webinar that I attended just 2 Fridays ago. She spoke to a different set of biases that could arise in virtual interviews, which I thought was really sort of like poignant, and I needed to call out here. I think, for example, if you think that you're interviewing me right now in this instance, and I had to do it in my bedroom, which is not in a pristine condition, would you be judging me and making certain assumptions about me that you would otherwise not be making if we were doing this in an office? So I think this is where the future of work could make or break D&I. So on the one hand, I think the further enablement of work from home or work from anywhere for that matter could open up opportunities for us to tap into some of the undertapped segments, such as persons with disabilities, as well as return to work parents. On the other hand, it could also create new challenges, as what I've just shared, that organizations do need to address in a very timely manner. So it doesn't compromise on the quality of hire.
Yeah, thank you, Joyce. Yeah, there's actually so much there that we can talk further about during this session. And I saw Anish nodding his head and Nolita as well throughout your comments. So I think there's a lot that we can share moving forward, which is fantastic. So this is going to be an interesting one, and it's interesting for me because I think everyone does on occasion feel a little bit overwhelmed by how big this topic is and how much needs to go into making diversity, inclusion, and belonging something that's actionable and something that's successful within the businesses that we work with. I appreciate that often people will feel like they're only one person, and what sort of influence can they have? So I am going to ask each of you, how do we get the entire company, including the leadership team, regardless of the position we're in ourselves, how do we get everyone in the company, including the leadership team, on board with diversity and inclusion initiatives? So I know it's a big question. We don't have to have all the answers, but I'm very much looking forward to your thoughts here. So Nolita, let's start with you this time. What do you think?
Sure. I was very encouraged because prior to joining Axiata, I was with a global bank, of which diversity was not just a nice play card to have. I worked for a gentleman who always came up to me and said, for us at that time, at least 30% of my viable candidates must be diverse. And at that time, we were building gender diversity. We were not allowed to have a stacked panel interview that did not reflect diversity. We also did an assessment of people who are promoted. And in one of the segments, we actually did a gender parity pay gap, not only analysis, but action. So that organization actually galvanized me further in that, that D&I is not DE&I, is not just an IWD action. You really have to see how far are you embedding it into the behavior and into your practices and policies. I've been very fortunate since I've come back. I've actually worked for CEOs who just embraced it. And in my current organization, when we launched our People First town hall, the second bullet point that my CEO, group CEO, put was gender diversity. So therefore, the call to action got galvanized. So it was easy, in an essence, for me to begin the actions. Whether it has resulted in the results, it's early days. Some are more advanced than the others. For example, we are a telco in the digital business. The digital business, which has younger talents, automatically goes into a 50-50 at all levels. In a telco, I have a bit more of perhaps engineers and my towers, it's going to stack up a little bit different. And also the nuances comes from different countries. This is the reality of it, because no matter how we preach the D&I, the societal and cultural impacts are always going to be there, in the sense like, are there enough women that come to the workforce? So at the recent conversations that I had, in Malaysia, for example, by ILO, women in workforce was 51%, it's 61% in Singapore and 73% in Vietnam. The question is, are all the accessible workforce available for us to choose from? So when I'm talking about getting through leadership, I want to be able to, at all angles, show that, okay, I can give you 10 viable candidates, it's 4 and 6, and it doesn't have to be like, oh, every time it has to be 50-50. I think that's non-pragmatic, but you have to show a practice that you are embracing it. And I do see, and leadership, when they see actions and they see that, you build credibility. And I say it's not an HR agenda, to my dear colleagues. It is a people agenda, and this people comes to your units. It's not me. I facilitate the platform. So I'm quite strong in holding my position, Katie, about that. This has to be driven by the whole organization, from acquisition into attraction, into retention, into performance management, and I hope into pay equity. You pay for the role.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and I love that you've been able to have that experience of building and implementing a structure, that reflects the values, that then actually embed those values into the behaviours of the entire organisation itself, because obviously that has such powerful influence.
Early days, I won't lie, there have some resistance.
All right. I believe we all like to consider life as a work in progress, for its entirety. So keep at it. It's definitely worth it. And over to you, Joyce. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. And I think Nolita's sort of like hit the spot about how D&I really needs to be an organizational wide effort. But I think there's no denial the important role, or rather the necessity to have the senior leadership on board of this. So perhaps let me share a little bit about the perspective that we have at GovTech. So a more intentional look into D&I is actually a fairly recent development within the public sector in Singapore. I believe our minister in charge of public service said in a media interview just in early February this year, which set the tone, where he mentioned about, or rather he indicated the importance to mobilize diversity by tapping on the range of talent and skills that the society has when it comes to developing solutions for our country. So I think this is very much aligned with our role at GovTech in harnessing the power of infocom technology to improve the lives of Singaporeans. So I think this in turn reflects the importance of having a diverse and inclusive workplace in our agency. So right now, on top of my employer branding hat, I have the privilege of co-leading D&I efforts at GovTech with another colleague of mine who sits within our people and organization division, which is HR. I personally actually sit within comms and marketing. So we're both coming from different divisions. I think we have a good place that we're starting with, because efforts around D&I efforts in GovTech, including with underprivileged communities as well as persons with disabilities, have actually sort of been organic and driven from bottoms up to begin with. So in more recent times, we received our leadership team's blessing to participate in a corporate pledge led by SG Women in Tech. So with this pledge, we've committed 3 actions that we would fulfill in the course of the next 1 year to better support the attraction, retention, as well as development of women in tech for GovTech ourselves, and as well as for Singapore at large. So I think this also nicely fits into our HR team's work plan for the next 1 year, where they've identified D&I as a key area of focus. So we're actually kickstarting a feasibility study as well to examine data and trends within and outside of GovTech to inform our eventual development of strategy and recommendations. So I think for us, it's really important to get leadership on the same page right from the beginning, and they need to be assured that D&I comes with the right motivations, coupled with a measurable impact for our organization. But that said, I think it's also equally important to start galvanizing support from the ground as early as possible for 2 simple reasons. One is to ensure that we have whatever we are building will resonate with teams, and secondly, there is sustainability to our efforts. So for us, one of the things that we're doing is, first and foremost for these 3 committed actions, is actually to call for signups for an employee resource group called Women in GovTech. So this is really where we're starting to get our employees to be more actively involved, to put their hands up to support this ERG. So at that point, when we called for signups, we've already secured 2 executive sponsors, 1 male and 1 female as well. And to date, we are super encouraged by the amount of support we're getting for this ERG.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That I was actually told by a wise manager of mine, that which is measured is managed. So when you talk about measurability and making sure that the actions that you're taking can have those results that then can be assessed and further analyzed to build upon, I think that really leads everyone to take more notice of it and make sure that it is ongoing or managed in an ongoing or consistent nature, which is super important for it to be successful. Now, Nish, how do you think we get the entire company involved? What have you got any pearls of wisdom for what you've done to get leadership team and everybody else working with you on these initiatives?
We've tried definitely different ways to approach this, but I think it's either in the bank or outside. I've seen two different kind of ways this is being dealt with, and these are possibly 2 stories which resonate with me. In one instance, I think it was like, okay, this is something which we need to do. This is an HR thing. We need to do it for our employees and colleagues. And I think the second was, this is something we need to do, which is for the client. We see innovation happening through that lens. And we see, this is the impact if we do it this way. And there's so much of research around it. And, the latter really worked far, far better when it is the entire organization behind it. It's the leaders who are, not only talking about it, they're putting actually, action words into action. As Nolinda was saying, I think it is not purely about saying this is what we would do, but how do you go behind? I think many teams within an organization, including HR plus others, needs to participate. And I think the key is around, this is not only for, our employees. I think, if that is the case, I guess possibly it will not take that leverage at all. It is how are you actually being diverse so that you can innovate, you can actually impact the client. Yeah. And I think as you start taking that lens, you possibly start realizing a lot of leaders are on board. Yeah. And a lot of people below them actually on board to say, this is how we need to do. This is not an HR thing. So for me, it's always, and I've seen this actually happening. One was a pure HR play, and second was a business play with data and insights and linkage to our purpose of the organization. And that's where I have seen it really working well. Yeah.
Well, you've actually just preempted my next question. So stay with me for a minute, off mute, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The next question I was going to ask was what have been your learnings when implementing diversity, inclusion, belonging programs or initiatives? So you've obviously had some experience with the implementation. Is there any like one or even maybe two or three learnings that stands out in mind that our audience could benefit from you sharing?
Sure, I think happy to share that. Means the two aspects maybe I can share. Means one is where do we focus our D&I energies and focus on? So there's so many, yeah, if you ask me. And the way we have structured for ourselves is, what are we doing, to how do we hire and attract, diverse workforce? That's one. How are we serving our diverse client needs? That's our second. So talking more about the client. And the third is about communities. Yeah. So that was one of the key aspects is how do you want to really connect it with your purpose and values and mission of an organization, which was one of the key things to say if that's connected, it's actually going to be far more inclusive and diverse in the way we approach it. The other practical aspect or the one of the best practices I've seen working really well, I think we were just referencing there are only at times one or two individuals who have D&I as their full-time responsibility in organization, or even possibly not. Yeah. How do you really bring a team of people to actually start looking at these at a process level, at a policy level, at a a philosophy and approach level? And I think what we have done is I think it's been successful for the last few years. It's been running. We've created a working group which represents few key members from HR, like people who are looking at talent attraction and branding, who are looking at talent like myself, and PRB where we look at from a comp point of view. So yes, definitely that. We started also including people from communications, from a kind of different teams like supply chain. We're looking at supply chain diversity now. Yeah. How do we look at branded marketing and those aspects from a bank point of view? So as it starts to kind of happen, then you start seeing, okay, this is how it's going to work together, because it's not only one place. So that's a practical bit I have really learned well. I think it is tough. Yeah, but I think as you start bringing in the right parties into the group, have a clear agenda, shape the agenda with them, and then kind of take it forward. So that's been one of my kind of very, very good learnings, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually really insightful and really helpful. Thanks for sharing. Nolita, what about you? Have you had any learnings that have stood out to you when implementing one of your DIMB programs and or initiatives?
I mean, on top of what Anish has spoken, I want to speak one that has really worked is really bringing in the gentleman into the equation early enough. And when Axiata, we just launched our sort of diversity and focusing on gender. So I said I didn't want it as a subset. So I wanted it to be women of Axiata and male allies. Really putting the men center stage, that the conversation from the beginning, the articulation and the strategy. And I like how Anish has highlighted, and that's how I believe it needs to be operated from the employee perspective, from your client's perspective, and all the communities, because I think that's the way that the world is evolving. It gets validated in this ecosystem. So I think that's my one of my learnings is that bringing in the males into the discussion early enough brings I get adoption, and sometimes people say, oh, you got to get male allies, and sometimes women don't quite perhaps appreciate when a man comes out to be so emphatic about supporting the gender diversity. Sometimes they do face some backlash. I always like to refer to this Harvard article that says some men who come out in strong support of gender diversity is like, seriously, are you a wimp or something like that? Or sometimes even from the women, it says, seriously, do I have to put you up on a pedestal for you to want to support the women's cause? So that equation for me is quite important. The other one is something that I believe that I learned, which is the negative that you have to pivot to a positive. D&I shouldn't be about an individual. So I've been through several organizations where we put through this program ahead. And then when it's only about the individual, what happens is that when the people leave, then the effort, the perseverance doesn't happen. And you know, before a big change happen, and if you're in a local company versus a multinational, it doesn't get institutionalized. So the person goes away, so you just need a different spokesperson. So how do you build that continuity? So the learning for me is, how can I ensure in the system that, say, my group CEO who's absolutely passionate about this, say he goes somewhere else, am I going to be assured that the next person carries that agenda? So I like to see that is amplified. Perhaps it's my banking days. I need insurance. I need to mitigate this. Otherwise, it takes you back. It takes me back 10 steps when I've moved 3 steps. So these are my learnings on the positives, and some of the negatives. I says, okay, I need to pivot this so that it doesn't happen that when the individual goes away, that I lose the momentum. I still think in the Asian context, a lot of it resonates from the top. So, the role modeling is still very key, and that's a key learning for me as I go and drive this program ahead.
Yeah, great. And actually, we've had a couple of comments from our audience about the importance of having all the people across the business, involved in driving these initiatives. It can't just be leadership, and I think that stems from a similar idea of it can't just be one person, charging forward, because you do tend to lose quite a bit of momentum and progress if that one person moves on or becomes limited in terms of how much they can focus on the topic at hand. So really, really interesting, and thanks everyone for your comments. Please do keep them coming through. So Joyce, what learnings have you got that you could share with us from GovTech or even prior to your time at GovTech?
Sure. So I mean, it's still fairly early days for us at GovTech, so I think I'll be in a much better position to answer this question in about a year's time from now. But even from what we've done so far at GovTech, I think one of the key learnings has definitely been to start small and palatable than not to start at all. So the emphasis is really on starting small. Because I think it's, you could say that we're pretty late into the game, this whole D&I focus, particularly within the tech industry, has been ongoing, but particularly so over the recent years. But I think it's important not to be fixated on what's just happening in the ecosystem. I don't think there's any denial in our organization or at large that diversity and inclusion is important. But to get us started, we can't be just focused on looking at what people are doing out there, trying to find all the data and insights and benchmarking ourselves before we decide to take a move. So I think we're very encouraged, therefore, that we've had some of our employee-led initiatives that have been running for several years since GovTech started. But right now, this year, we are finally going to be a little bit more coordinated, driving centrally from a team led by myself and Sarah, to at least start taking a look at the gender diversity topic while we tackle the feasibility study that I earlier mentioned. So, one of the key learnings that I would share with the audience here is definitely not to get too overwhelmed. It's easy to, and just really look at your organization, what's important to your organization and your leadership, and start somewhere now.
Lovely. And actually that's it's really interesting because both you and Norlita have mentioned gender diversity specifically, and I think a lot of the time we can have challenges with potentially finding candidates who are gender diverse for the roles. I've shared previously when I was building my team last year, the year before last, I apologize, and I actually didn't have any female applicants. And I thought, what have we done, or what have we, how have we positioned this role to not attract any female candidates? And now what do we do to tell them it's going to be okay? Like, we want them to consider us. It goes back to that employer branding, proposition, but also just to be considered for the specific roles we were advertising for. So, Joyce, if you don't mind coming back off mute, have you got any ideas or creative ways that you've been able to proactively source candidates from underrepresented groups or communities?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think this is a question I would actually have loved to listen to my fellow panelists share. So I think what I will be sharing wouldn't necessarily be like super creative, but other than, of course, as you earlier mentioned, Katie, about just creating the representation. So informing our candidates about the representation, sharing really authentic stories from some of these individuals we have from underrepresented communities. I think one of the things that we haven't done enough and could be doing more of, certainly at GovTech, is establish partnerships with not-for-profit organizations that support certain underrepresented groups of talent. So, I'll share briefly my story. Of course, I know who GovTech is, but my interest in GovTech actually peaked when I attended a not-for-profit agency's virtual forum, where two colleagues were speaking about accessibility of tech and what they were doing at GovTech. So even though I was not a tech, I was not an engineer, but D&I was something that I was hugely passionate about, and therefore that got me interested. So I know that through platforms like collaboration with some of these organizations, we'll be able to start associating our brands with them, and of course in turn tap on their network of talents as well. But I think also importantly, besides looking at the now, we also need to project into the future. So in the instance of getting more women into tech, for example, I think it's important to look at nurturing the future pool of talents. So I think that's what we're doing quite a bit of existingly in GovTech in terms of outreach as well as engagement with girls through schools. And a mentorship program is actually, in fact, what we're looking at even for those who are still in school right now. So I think right now we're also investigating into communities of return to work females. So we'll get to the males. Of course, they do exist in smaller proportion in terms of the return to work community. So with them, we're looking at supporting the skilling or upskilling of their digital skills and know-hows to prepare them for potential future in tech. So they could be working in tech previously, or they could have a passion to pivot into tech. So we want to be able to provide our expertise and help guide them into a future career in that area. So some of these efforts are not going to result in instantaneous outcomes for us, but I think it's really important for us to start creating resonance and favorability for our brand at GovTech. So yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, thank you. And I've seen a couple of comments come through talking about making sure that we are representing all groups. So I know that there's been a couple of mentions of working to gain more opportunities maybe for women when we're talking about gender diversity within these businesses or within the experiences that we're discussing. But I think it definitely depends on the roles that you have. Where we've seen a disparity between the two genders. It's obviously far beyond just a gender conversation, but I do want to acknowledge that we are considering all people when we talk about diversity. Just some of the examples today have been specifically related to including women in some roles that aren't traditionally inclusive of women. So again, thank you for your comments. Do keep them coming along. And Nish, what about you? Have you got some creative ways that you've proactively sourced candidates from underrepresented groups or communities?
A great question, Katie. I think I was thinking of the example you were talking about, your hiring experience, yeah, and what happened, yeah, possibly. Means one of the things I have seen, and I think this is pretty interesting, is how do you write job descriptions and propositions which are gender neutral? Yeah. And actually now there are so many tools for you to do that. You don't need a psychologist to sit next to you. There are so many online tools to actually put your, it shows you the strength, it shows you the words. So don't use the word like ambitious, dominance, which are masculine words. Yeah. Which actually even before people show interest, they may think that this is the job not for them. Yeah. So that's one practical, aspect if you ask me to kind of explore. The second can be, I think we talked about, Melinda talked about, and Joyce also talked about, like employee resource groups you mentioned, yeah. How do we use them as our ambassadors, yeah, to attract people, because they are, really allies. They are actually actively working in these causes. They may not be in HR, they may not be the hiring managers, but they can really be actually your employee ambassadors to, look at, different groups. And one of the things I do want to call out, I think you mentioned is around, we talk about diversity. I think there's so many strands of diversity to think of. Yeah, gender is one of them. Yeah, let me put it that way. And there's a piece around inherit and acquired. Yeah, that's how they kind of term it as. So inherit is like your race, your gender, all of those aspects. And acquired is all about skills, yeah, experiences, and those aspects. And that's a tricky one, if you ask me, because it's really at times difficult to measure skills outside your organization. Yeah, internally, possibly, yes. But I think that's where I guess we need to start looking at it collectively. So I think those are some of the areas, to look at how we position our jobs, how we use ERGs, and also, how we really kind of talk about diversity, across. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. So Nolita, would you like to join in here as well, and then what we'll do after your thoughts is jump into some of the audience questions, because I believe there's some good ones, and I think you'll all be really honoured to be able to contribute to the audience questions that we've had here today. So Nolita, have you got some creative ways you can proactively source candidates?
So two things I just want to say, and picking up from Joyce, one of the things that I do in terms of ensuring diversity, and I mean diversity in all aspects, is connecting with the advocacy groups that either goes for technology or for young talents. For example, some of the conversations I have with in Malaysia is young corporate Malaysians, because I do want to tap into that professional skills from the young talent. We're a multi-generational workforce, and I'm so conscious. And I think when we talk about diversity, we're really talking about the concept of intersectionality, because one person can represent many angles of diversity. I'm a woman, I'm an Asian, I'm a baby boomer, so it's all these things that come out, and how do you harness the respective skills? So I think that needs to come out, and I think you need to connect with the different diversity groups. And actually Anish pulled out something that's really key. Any organization's best advertisement walks on 2 feet, and that's why for me, you can have so many ads, EDMs, and anything else. For me, it's like, when a person walks out, do we walk and smell like an Axiata talent? And perhaps this comes from my early banking days, where they say that, do you walk and smell like it? Because that's what we are. And I believe that our diversity conversations always begin from, I want that diversity of thoughts and actions. And that can become from all the various categories, because you come back to the purpose of diversity and not just the angle. That's what I wanted to say. Connect with the advocacy groups, because, oh my gosh, you've got such a rich source of talents, for me at least. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, definitely, and it's those groups, and as Anish mentioned before, I think it was Anish actually. Now, forgive me if it wasn't, but the advocates and the allies that can also contribute. So let's look at some of the audience questions, and this first one caught me caught my attention about 20 minutes ago. So I've been very much looking forward to asking. Joyce actually touched on this a little bit earlier, so Joyce, I might give you a chance to speak first on this one. We had a question that's, in this dynamic work environment, how important is it to give emphasis on diversity at work from home, from the work from home kind of situation? So I think it's how does work from home change the emphasis required on diversity?
Yeah, thanks for giving me the honor of answering the first question from our audience. Thanks for the question as well. I think you asked me again, the emphasis has been tremendous. I think we've all noticed since COVID happened that there's just been so much more considerations about how different people are in different situations, right? I think if we talk about the most fundamental definition of diversity, is just about the differences that exist amongst us common human beings, right? So we could be, for example, living in Singapore, Katie and Anish, but we could be living in very different environments. Maybe I've got a pet cat, which I was literally worried about him purring away as I'm doing this call. While Katie, you might have your children sort of like running around suddenly and wanting to appear in front of the video. Or like I said, there might be singles who can't afford to live in a huge place, and therefore perhaps staying in a one-room apartment that's not in a pristine state. So it definitely brings to light the diversity amongst us that might otherwise have been hidden when we're just showing up at work. So I do think that the attention diversity gets has increased given our remote working situation. And as I earlier mentioned, of course, when it comes to attracting and hiring talents, I think it's brought about some great opportunities for us to tap on some of the workforce that we might otherwise have had difficulty to bring into the office, such as those people with disabilities or even those who have not been in the workforce for a while. So I do think that there are both pros and cons of the diversity aspect of things that's been amplified with the work from home situation. But I think it's up to us employers to determine how we want to take advantage of it and bring in the diverse and amazing talent that we have out there.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Joyce. And instead of giving you all an opportunity to answer the same question, because we have so many from the audience, this is going to make it a little bit more fun. You don't get to prep your answers when you listen to Joyce go first. So Nolita, I'm going to pass this on to you. So fungibility of skills, or the interchangeability of skills versus specialization on one skill has always been in discussion. What do you think will be a trend in hiring now? And is diversity an element that's going to contribute to that opportunity?
The two skills that I see always coming up is, one is the analytical and digital, and the other one is creativity. So I do think that the diversity of whether it be on, whether it be on generations or whether it be on gender, it will come to play. Because and I do think that you're going to go more into specialization before you go into generalization. And perhaps if I talk about where we as an organization are going, if I say I'm going to be the next digital champion, you're going to know which sort of skill sets I'm going to go, right? So whilst the bigger economy of the nation may want something else, there's a certain a focus. So I would think that the focus on digital analytics and creativity, there's so much literature that is happening now between how we need to balance the left and the right brain. And I was just talking to the people managers. Sometimes we try and find a Superman or a Superwoman. It could be complementary. Perhaps when we are, focusing so much on collaboration, we could do this. As people look at job sharing, the world is going to change so much more into work arrangements, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, Anish, this is perfectly for you, based on the conversation we had, I believe it was late last week. But we've had a question that says, when you talk about D&I, are you also keeping in consideration equity or equal opportunities? Now, I remember last week, I was talking about DI and B, and you were talking about DI and E. That's why I think this is perfect. The second part to the question is also, how does one further segregate diversity, cultural, gender, educational skills, etc.? So over to you, please.
Definitely a very, very interesting question. Yeah. And I think, I think it's the way you want to look at it. Yeah. I think it's diversity, inclusion, belonging, diversity, inclusion, equality, equity. Yeah. And I think I think Pauline mentioned around this earlier. It is about, the gender pay gap. Yeah. And how are you addressing that? How are you bringing, equality around that area? Yeah. So that's one kind of, strand and aspect of it. And if I purely look at it, even if we don't use equality and equity, it's all about inclusion. Yeah, it's all about giving opportunity and equal opportunity to people as they are applying for jobs, as they are internally within the organization, and what opportunity do they get. So it is all about inclusion in that matter. So it's a way of positioning, I would say. Yeah, but I think it is very, very important. Yeah, I think because if we are not able to kind of I would say kind of unlock or kind of remove some of these barriers and challenges, then we're not going to progress further. We possibly just be stuck there. We keep on talking about it. So I think it's so evident. It's so much of research data now around it to say is how do we just do it? Yeah, and it's going to take time. So I'm not saying it's a very easy thing to do. Yeah, it takes years. Yeah, I think it's that persistence and process what you need to really start evolving in that journey. So that I think that's definitely quite an important aspect. Yeah, and people are looking at that overall from, again, equal opportunities for people to apply for jobs. Yeah, and we talked about underrepresented groups. How do you kind of get that happening? And one of the other interesting dimensions which I also see with future of work now is the pool of actually talent is going to grow and increase. As we're looking at hiring, are we hiring in Singapore or are we hiring? Yeah, it can be anywhere. Yeah, so is it people moving to jobs or jobs moving to people? Yeah, and this is a disruption. It's early days, but I do see that coming. Yeah, and that creates far more opportunities for people in different areas. Again, I think our policies or taxation, I don't think so. These are easy things to solve as we talk about employment across. But the way it's moving, I do see that equal opportunities, and as it will evolve, and we possibly will crack the policy aspects as well with governments to move in that direction, and that creates a lot much around equal opportunities and equity as well. Yeah, that's my take on that, Katie. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I agree with you. I think it's again, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is such a big topic, and I think unfortunately, 60 minutes just isn't long enough for us to solve all the challenges that everyone's facing or answer all the questions. We may need to do round 2 to get through them all. But there's two that I'd like to address really, as efficiently as we can before our time together is up. Firstly, I've seen a comment that talks about a friend having cerebral palsy, unable to move but has IT networking skills, and the question being around how people with differently abled opportunities can be given those chances to gain employment. Now, I think Joyce mentioned this before. One of the equalizers that we've experienced in the last 12 months plus has been working from home and everyone going to small video boxes on their screens for the majority of their working lives. Joyce referenced bedrooms before. We had a chat about that previously, but where maybe in the past, walking into an interview or heading into an interview, someone might judge your physical presence or the way you're dressed or the way you present yourself, that sort of thing. Now are we in a position where people are judging our backgrounds or the choice of clothes we've worn or how we look from our shoulders up? We don't know what changes they're going to bring, but we do like to think that for when we're thinking specifically about differently abled people, that not having limitations of an office is actually going to help open more opportunities, and that is personally my wish for the future of work there for differently abled people, and hopefully that's something that we can talk about on another occasion. But I'd like to finish with a 1 minute answer from each of you. So there's your challenge from me. You get 1 minute, 1 minute each. This last question, I think, is a big one, so it's an even bigger challenge. How do you counteract comments from leadership such as, we just hire or promote the best person for the job, regardless of race or gender? I think what the question's suggesting is, without necessarily needing to take diversity, equality, inclusion, belonging into account, how do we change that mentality? So 1 minute, Nolita, you're welcome. You get to go first. Go.
You just have to make sure that you are in the system that allows access, because I think, yes, we should still retain the fact that we will hire and promote the best. That is not negotiable. Our question is, does our conscience say that we've given equal access, and have we really tapped all of the population? And I think it's the same people who ask the questions that we should push them back on that one. That's my half a minute, one minute.
Brilliant. Well done. Joyce, what about you?
Well, I can't say I have as succinct an answer, but I would probably say that with performance, you first have to understand whether they are based on individuals' managers' judgment, or is it based on a 360-degree sort of assessment. That's for one. And I also believe that, I think the crux of this question comes when you have two candidates, perhaps two of different profiles. I mean, for the sake of, discussion, one male, one female, and they perform equally well, and you could only promote one, who would you? Right? I think then that really brings the management up for, a challenge. So in this case, who would you promote to put forward a statement of your commitment to celebrate or to really champion a diverse group of talent in your organization?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Joyce. Anish, we get to finish with you.
All my ideas, I think Olinda and Joyce have just covered, So, but let me take a different perspective to this. Yeah, one is I think the bias of I don't have a bias. Yeah, it's a very interesting bias to kind of think of. Yeah, and when you put that into a selection and interviewing aspect, yeah, I would possibly propose and kind of push forward for diverse panels, which then see the uniqueness of each individual and the diversity and their kind of commitments as well. And then you take an objective decision around it. So that in a way is nice to say. Otherwise, I think the research says, I will hire someone very similar to me. That's how I think, naturally things happen. But then how do you bring the diversity in selection, getting your peers to interview in other aspects to actually then, carve that out to say is then we're actually looking at all aspects of diversity. As I said, skills and all other strands as well. So, it's equal play there. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. And thank you all for being so succinct. You were actually also succinct, Joyce, there. Appreciate your comments and thank you everyone for the great amount of information we've actually considered and covered today. Hopefully it's there's a lot there for our audience to share with peers and partners. So thank you to our panelists especially. Thank you for everyone for contributing your questions. I apologise we haven't been able to get to all of them, but I do believe this is an ongoing conversation that we can continue to have. And also for our attendees, I'd like to inform you that we do have another exciting panel session where we'll discuss adapting employer branding strategies for the future of work. It's scheduled for tomorrow, 3 till 4 p.m. Singapore time, for which the calendars are already booked. We'll be joined again by leading industry experts from Singapore and Southeast Asia for this session as well. So do join us there. But with this, we'll conclude today's session. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you very, very much to our panelists. Really appreciate your insights. Wishing you all the best, everyone, in your DINB or DINE journeys. And of course, for you and your community, stay safe and well. Thanks again, everyone.